Okay, hello everybody. How's it going? This is episode number 19, I believe now, of Ask Azren. As you can see, I've changed my laptop setup. I decided to try and get this window out of the way. I got my laptop on the printer. I often go in the kitchen for things like this, but I think my sister might be home soon, so I'll be in their way, so we'll make do like this. If you're new to the segment on my YouTube channel, it's pretty straightforward. This is a segment where I answer a variety of questions about language learning. Today we have I almost called you Logan for a second. Jared. We have Jared who's asking the questions today as usual. And we have a recurring segment. What is it called again? Fun facts about Jared, right?
Yeah, that sounds good. Or fun facts about Logan if you'd prefer.
We can call you Logan. So what's our fun fact about Jared today?
Okay, on the topic of language learning, the first language that I actually studied was Hebrew. When I was a kid, I took Hebrew classes, but that isn't a language that I speak now. It's not a language that I study. It's not a language that I really know anything about, but it was actually my first ever exposure to foreign languages.
Well, there you go. How did you learn Hebrew, or how were you learning Hebrew, rather?
I had classes once a week when I was a kid. Yeah.
Do you remember any of it?
Caleb is a dog.
Great.
Teshev means sit down. Yeah, not much. My first question for you is, do you have a specific number of languages that you'd like to learn in your lifetime?
Yes. I have a very specific list, actually, that might change over time. I might add things to it, but this has been the list for the longest time. English, French, Spanish, Mandarin, Gujarati, Hindi, Russian, Arabic. Those are the 8. I would like to potentially add an African language, something like Swahili or like Xhosa or who knows, like take something from a different language family that's not in those 8 that I mentioned. But those are basically the 8 that I've had on my list for quite some time.
And how did you come up with those languages?
Pretty arbitrarily. Some of them are logical enough. So English, French, and Spanish, English, French, and Gujarati. I grew up with all 3. I did my studies primarily in French. I went to a French immersion school, so most of my education was in French growing up. So I've spoken French my whole life, or almost my whole life. I also went to France and I studied in France when I was 15. So basically, after that trip to France, my French has been really, really fluent. Basically, since that time, my French has been very strong. Not to say it wasn't strong before, but it just got much stronger after actually living in France with the family, going to school in France. So French was always there and logically made sense. Spanish I started studying in high school because it was a foreign language. It was, I believe, the only foreign language that was offered apart from French. And after my trip to France and coming back when I was 15, I was like, man, maybe I like languages. Maybe I should try learning some Spanish. So I took some Spanish classes and I liked it. So I decided that's a language that I wanted to continue. I chose Hindi logically because it's very rare for someone to speak Gujarati and not speak Hindi. It's a very rare phenomenon. It doesn't happen very often. And so I thought it's a very logical language to learn. It's also I guess you could say lingua franca. It's the language that if you are from Gujarat and you go to Punjab in India, in Punjab, they don't speak Gujarati. So you would speak in Hindi and you can get by using Hindi. So if someone moves to Gujarat and they move from a different region, they would speak in Hindi and they'll get by just fine in Hindi. So it seemed like a very logical language to learn. For Arabic, Russian, and Mandarin. Mandarin, I wish I remember how it happened. I remember thinking I wouldn't learn it. And then I think my ex-girlfriend was taking a Mandarin class and she was talking about how there's no conjugations or something. And I was like, what? And then I eventually got myself thinking, okay, maybe I'll learn this. I don't remember exactly how it happened. Arabic was because of how many countries speak Arabic. It's such a widely spoken language. I thought it's practical. And Russia, it's kind of funny, but I chose Russian because I looked on the map and I was like, wow, that's a big country. That's a good percentage of the globe that speaks one language. That seems like a good language to learn. And that seems pretty practical. That's what my brain told me at the time. Now, there might be more practical languages, I suppose, but I chose it such a long time ago that now it's just something I've decided I'm going to learn at some point.
And for Arabic, is there a certain dialect that you want to learn?
I don't know as of right now. When I first made the goal, when I first decided I would learn Arabic, I didn't realize there were so many dialects. I didn't know that at the time. I just thought they all spoke Arabic and they were all very similar. Right now, probably what will end up happening is I will learn Modern Standard. So that's the written version from my understanding. And then as for a specific dialect, it'll probably depend at what pulls at my heartstrings. So if I meet, so for example, I met someone from Syria? I think it was Syria. I believe it was Syria. I met someone from Syria a couple years back and we really got along. And so at the time I was kind of thinking of starting Arabic, like actually picking up properly. So I was considering learning a Syrian dialect because I had a friend who spoke it. I've thought about learning a Yemeni dialect because my best friend is from Yemen and his family's Yemeni. So that's something I think about, but I don't know. It'll depend on whenever I decide to start learning it, whatever resources I have access to and whatever I suppose is the easiest pathway, but also the path that interests me the most, that's the dialect I'll probably choose. I'll learn one dialect to start, and then over time I might learn others too. Who knows?
So when it comes to learning languages that have fewer resources, how do you go about doing that?
Yes, so I have some experience with that when it comes to Gujarati. There are some resources for Gujarati, but there aren't that many. There are other languages that people learn that have far less resources in Gujarati. So Gujarati is not the language with the least amount of resources on the list, that's for sure. But definitely has less than, the major languages that people learn. The way that I personally have gotten around it is just putting in more time to figure things out. In my experience, when a language has a lot of resources, all it means is that it doesn't take quite as long to figure out something complicated in that language. For example, if you're confused about a grammar point in Spanish, odds are you Google it and someone's posted something about that grammar point that can clear it up for you. Or if no one's made an article, you can probably find a teacher, ask them, and you'll probably find someone who can break it down for you. For Gujarati, that's not the case. And so that means that myself, for example, I used to manually figure out grammatical differences. I used to manually sit down and I would make what I used to do. I remember one particular grammar point. There's two words for I, but you sometimes use one, you sometimes use the other. And depending on the word you use, the verb conjugation changes too. And I couldn't get my head wrapped around it. So I made a whole list of sentences. I made basically a chart, like a T chart. One side was one form of I, one side was the other form of I. There were certain sentences and phrases I knew were correct with each form of I, so I wrote them down. There were some that I wasn't quite sure, so I took an educated guess. And then I would ask native speakers, hey, are these correct? Like, can I say, are the sentences in I number one, are those sentences correct? They would say, oh, no, that should go into I number two. Oh, okay. I'd move it over. I'd have them correct my I number two sentences and say, oh, no, those should be in the I number one. Oh, okay. And I would get them and I would try to see if I can find a pattern. Eventually I did find a pattern. I figured it out. And then I would test my theory. I would then use the pattern I think I found, almost like a mathematical exercise, a very intellectual exercise. I would basically take this pattern, I make my own sentences, again, categorizing I number one, I number two, show it to native speakers. Are these correct? They'd say, yeah, that's correct. I was like, I figured it out. So what it means is, if there's no resources, it takes 10 times longer, and that might not even be a big exaggeration. It might be 10 times longer even, where you have to go figure it out. You have to think about it, you have to listen, you have to write down what you hear, ponder it, ask native speakers if this is correct or if this doesn't sound right. You just have to do a lot more research, I find.
You basically have to make your own resources at that point.
Yeah, make your own, or sometimes you just have to Google more. You have to do some more, you have to Google deeper. You have to do more in-depth search queries, look at
Mhm.
more YouTube channels, more blog, like look more, look harder. Like Gujarati, I used to think had no resources. Now that I've looked harder, I found more than I ever thought existed, and there still aren't that many, but I found more than I ever thought there'd be, and it's pretty good. Like there's quite a few more than I thought. I had to look pretty, I had to look pretty darn hard to do so.
What do you think the most important language learning tool is?
Google, internet, the internet.
Pretty all-encompassing.
Sorry, I paused for dramatic effect. Yeah, the internet. I'll explain a bit further. The internet is literally the best language learning tool. It's an all-encompassing statement. Instagram, following hashtags, following accounts, looking at flashcard accounts. Recently, I found a Swedish, I think it's a Swedish account. Someone sent it to me, where they teach Swedish through Disney clips from Disney movies. That's really cool. I found something similar in Mandarin. There are people that do skits. There's people that tell stories on YouTube and they teach you language through story. There's very traditional whiteboard style YouTube videos where they break down all the grammar points. There's comprehensive courses nowadays that are free for different languages. You have language exchanges on websites like italki and HelloTalk. You can Google anything. Literally, we now live in a world that for, I don't want to say most languages, because it's not the case, because there's so many thousands of languages that don't have resources. But let's say most major languages that the majority of people tend to go learn, like you can literally Google anything, whatever you're looking for. How do I pronounce the third tone in Mandarin? Type it in Google, and it tells you the answer. It's like God. It's like God is there, and God is like, here you go. It's crazy. It's like we live in such a crazy world now where you can literally go into Google, type anything you want, and you'll probably find the answer. It's crazy. And YouTube's the same way. YouTube is you can Google or YouTube. There's both. Heck, nowadays you can even go further. You can get into some more specific types of searches. Like I sometimes will do, like yesterday I was looking for Instagram accounts that taught, I mentioned the Swedish Disney thing. I was looking for Instagram accounts that taught Mandarin through cartoons. I didn't know if they'd exist. So I even searched in Instagram, hashtag learn Mandarin with cartoons, hashtag Mandarin cartoons, hashtag learn with anime, hashtag learn Chinese with I just searched different hashtags. I would cycle through to see if there's any Instagram accounts I can find. Didn't quite find what I was looking for. I found some similar things, which was nice. Someone asked if there's any accounts like that. So I Googled it. I basically looked it up for them.
So if you are maybe not necessarily a language enthusiast, but you have one target language that you really want to learn, you're saying, hey, I work a full-time job, maybe I don't have a lot of time to dedicate to this. I don't have a lot of time to look through a bunch of different online platforms. If there's one that is maybe more useful, more practical, more efficient than the other ones online, as in, is YouTube better than Instagram? Is Instagram better than Google? Like just for looking up articles or educational things like that. Like is one better than the other? If you had to choose one platform versus another.
I'll answer it in two ways. I'll answer it for me personally, and then I'll answer it in a more general way as well. For me personally, I would probably say, I think it's language specific, because you find different resources for different languages, that's for sure. Like different places have different types of resources for different languages. So that's important to realize. So I think for all languages, I don't have a blanket answer because it will depend. But for example, for Mandarin, I would say when I was really focused on learning Mandarin, YouTube was a resource I liked because there was particularly Yo-Yo Chinese was a useful resource because they used to have recordings of real conversations. She would go interview people and then she would break down what they said. So that was so useful for me. So that particular YouTube channel was really good. So I think, like, yes, you're saying people have full-time jobs, people are busy, and they're trying to find that one thing. I would argue that if you're busy and have a full-time job, it might mean that you have to, if you only have an hour a week, you're super busy. It might mean that before you start learning, you have to spend your first month, if you really only have an hour a week, which I don't believe in most cases, but sometimes it's the case. You might have to spend those first month or two doing a little bit of research about what kind of strategy do you want to implement or use to learn a language. Will you take a class? Will you use a study-at-home program like a Michelle Thomas or a Pimsleur? Will you do private lessons? Are you gonna just immerse yourself and watch TV? Some people, it's crazy how people learn by watching TV. I would struggle by doing it, but they do it. They just literally watch TV and they somehow figure it out. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. So yeah. It's kind of like, here's an analogy. It's like for working out. It's like if you said, what's the best workout regimen or the best nutritional, the best diet, let's say. Whew. How do you answer that? How do you do that? Well, it depends. Are you trying to lose weight? Are you trying to gain weight? Are you trying to gain muscle? Are you trying to become more flexible? What are you trying to do? Do you have any allergies? Like maybe, but the allergy equivalent of language learning is like, you might hate group classes. Like that just might be a thing for some reason in you. You just can't stand it. Maybe like, I don't know, maybe you only have $20 a month because you work part-time in a grocery store and you're a student. So like you can't spend a lot of money. Well, now you're much more limited. How can I say this is the best way now? Because now you have that allergy, quote unquote, AKA in more normal English, you have a restriction that other people that I maybe don't have, or you maybe don't have, so it's a very difficult thing to answer.
Yeah. Depends on what your goals are, I guess, and who you are.
Your goals, your resources, how much free time you have, how you learn. There's so much that goes into it that it's super difficult to give a blanket answer. It's really difficult.
But for you, a lot of online platforms have been the most useful in your language learning.
Yeah, for Mandarin, I remember initially YouTube was really useful. Initially, as a pure beginner, I really liked it. I used to watch some things.
Yep.
But the one thing that's always been a constant for me is classes. I take classes. I skip half my classes, which is the biggest irony of them all. I pay for them and I skip half my classes. I don't like going to classes. It's so weird. But I think I do it because I have a belief that the stronger the reason you have to learn a language, the faster you learn. Often it's not about what resource you use, actually, funnily enough. Often I find that the stronger the reason you have to learn a language, the faster you tend to learn. That's why people start dating someone and now all of a sudden they pick it up so quickly because they have a very strong, compelling reason to learn, which in this case is love or affection, or you like this person. You want to impress them, you want to spend time with them. So for me, classes gives me a pretty good reason to learn because I have to pass my tests. I don't want to be kicked out of the class. I don't want to fall behind and look like an idiot. I don't want to be the guy who didn't do their homework and everyone's like, what the heck? Why did you do your homework, man? It gives me a real reason to learn, especially because I take university classes when possible, where you could get kicked out of school and it actually shows up on a transcript and it's a little bit more official. It doesn't mean anything. I already have my degree, but it still means something.
They cost more as well at university?
Costs more. That's not... I told you I skip half my classes. Like, my tutors make so much money off me. If they charge me $20 an hour, they make $50 an hour. Because I insist on paying them when I cancel classes, because I know that if they don't charge me, I'll take advantage of it. So I make them charge me. I'm like, no. I know you want to be nice, but we're counting that class because I canceled on you when I only canceled because I wanted to watch TV and not because I had a legitimate reason. So I'm paying. Yeah. And they always think, they give me weird looks. Like, what? But you didn't use the time. I know, but if you let me get away with it, that's happening all the time. Yeah.
Do you think it's harder to learn or to teach a language?
That's a good question. Is it harder to learn a language or teach a language for me? I would say it's probably a little bit easier to teach a language for me. Yeah, I'd say maybe slightly easier to teach a language.
And why is that?
Um, I have so much experience with teaching things. I've taught for such a long time. Yeah, it just comes quite naturally to me. Especially if it's something, if I'm teaching something that I have a lot of experience with. I've seen people struggle with what you're struggling with so many times that I already know most likely 7 different things we can try that'll help you work through it. So that means you can just quickly, you can see success with it a lot easier. And the other thing is that when you're learning a language, this is probably a big thing. When you're, at least for me, when you're someone who has experience teaching and you've done it a lot, when you're teaching a language, the language learner's mind is working harder than your mind because you are facilitating their learning. So you are helping them learn. So their brain is working, trying to problem solve the language, and you're the facilitator to help that happen. When you're learning a language, your brain is the one that's working and trying to figure something out. And so I find that for me, there's more effort, more mental effort that goes into learning than teaching. The exception being if I'm teaching something that I don't have a lot of experience with, that is really new for me, I don't have the resources for, I haven't seen the challenges you might come up with, then it might be equally difficult or challenging. So I have to make the resources, I have to think on how I'll teach it, I have to really think it through. But most of the stuff I teach nowadays, I've had a lot of experience with for the most part. So
now you also have a lot of experience in learning languages as well, learning grammar points,
but it's
practicing
still,
pronunciation.
I don't learn any faster, I find. When I look at people that speak really fluently, that only, like for example, like Mandarin, that was my 5th language. And like I would meet people that had studied for just like, when I look at my friend Amanda is a great example. Amanda speaks English and Mandarin, 2 languages. English is her first language. Mandarin is her only foreign language. And I think, yes, I'm almost positive it's her only foreign language. And Amanda and I started learning Mandarin roughly at the same time. We learned roughly in the same way. Like we took some university classes. We both met in China where we did intensive lessons. We did some more classes. She did some like casual kind of study on her own. I did some casual study on my own. We've probably put in, a roughly speaking, the same number of hours. And we roughly speaking have put in, I've gone about it in similar enough. And both of us progressed at roughly the same pace. Like right now, when I look at her level, I look at mine, we're pretty darn similar. She's a little bit better in certain respects than I am, and I'm a little bit better in other respects than she is. Like there's certain things that I excel at that she doesn't, she excels at that I don't, like that's for sure. But generally we're at roughly the same level. And I'm a much more experienced language learner than her. So it does help me, but at the same time, whenever I look around, Amanda's only one of many examples I can name, but I don't learn way faster than other people. Not really.
I guess it would depend what the language was as well. If you and Amanda were learning, for example, Italian, and it was her first foreign language,
I would have an advantage.
Spanish and French, yeah, you would learn.
I would have an advantage. Faster. Yeah, I definitely would. Like if I learned Portuguese, so actually I do have a slight background of Portuguese, a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. And I speak Spanish and French. Like definitely, I would learn faster. But something that's quite different and foreign, like I didn't necessarily learn that much faster than her.
Okay. So you're saying the advantages that come with learning more languages are really in learning related languages?
In my experience of learning 5 languages, now if you ask someone like Lao Shu on YouTube, like I'm sure have you seen his videos?
Yeah.
Like he speaks, I don't know how many he speaks, but he might have a different perspective than me because he speaks way more languages than I do. So he might have a different perspective, but my experience so far showed me that.
But maybe the example is the same because for Lao Shu, he has more experience with more language families. But that means that the languages that he's learning most likely are related to something he's already learned.
Yeah, possibly. I think sometimes my experience with language learning will help. Like I might initially grasp something faster than you or faster than someone else. I might initially grasp it a bit faster, possibly, because I can relate it to something else I've learned, or I have more learning strategies maybe, or like I have a student I teach Mandarin right now. She speaks Hindi, English, Swedish, and think she speaks one more. I can't remember. Anyway, she speaks a few languages. Not because she's learned so many foreign languages. She grew up with English, Hindi, and one other Indian language, but I can't remember which one. So she grew up with 3. Swedish she's learned because she lived in Sweden.
Okay.
So she's learned 1 foreign language, basically. And now she's learning her 2nd foreign language, which is Mandarin. But still, I can see her, she makes connections to Mandarin a little faster than others, because she can compare it. She'll be like, oh, is that, okay, so if I say this word in Mandarin, would that be kind of like if I said this Hindi word, but then I like put this sound in it instead? Is that kind of similar? I'm like, and I speak Gujarati and some Hindi, so I can make the connections. I'll be like, yeah, basically. She'll say, oh, okay, I see what that means. So she has more information in her brain to pull from.
Right.
So she can initially grasp something faster than others, but for her to master it takes about the same amount of time. All right, well, everybody, thank you for watching. Jared, thanks for the questions as always. And yeah, I guess we'll all talk later.
Sounds good.
See you.